have just a gentle note before we begin. Today's conversation includes discussion of burnout, anxiety, and suicidal thinking in a non-graphic, supportive way. If you need immediate support, please reach out to your local crisis line or emergency services. Please listen in a way that feels safe for you. You're welcome to pause and come back at any time. This podcast is for education and support only and is not a substitute for professional medical, psychological, or crisis care. If you're in immediate danger or need urgent help, crisis support links are included in the show notes. Caregivers are taught to be the steady one, to keep going, to stay functional, to be compassionate no matter how stretched they feel. And they are. But over time, that kind of care can quietly turn into compassion fatigue, where your body is tired, your emotions are thin, your patience is gone, and even small demands feel like too much. And a lot of the advice carers get is either unrealistic, just take a break, or it piles more responsibility on the caregiver. Manage your stress better. Today, we're doing something different. We're talking about micro boundaries, small, nervous system safe ways to protect your well-being in the middle of real life using a tool called Oxygen. My guest is Jody Brooks, a coach, a well-being consultant who helps people move from overwhelm and burnout into clarity, values alignment, and sustainable performance. Jody has lived this personally too, including seasons of severe anxiety, depression, and suicidal thinking. And he speaks about it with a soft, shame-free honesty that I really value in this space. Jody, welcome to Radiant Moments.
Thank you. It's great to be here. I'm super excited to be able to share this with your listeners.
I am really excited about this conversation today too, Jody. I'd love to start with your story because you speak about burnout from the inside. From the outside, you had a lot going on. Leadership roles, international education, and award-winning business. What was happening internally during this season?
Emptiness. And you just have this huge void inside and you keep pushing and pushing and pushing because there's quite a lot of shame that goes with it, really, because like you've just said, on the outside, I had everything. I was getting on planes and flying around the world and all of those things. And I should have felt amazing, but I was just empty and pushing constantly through to try and find some sense of fulfillment. And it was like I'd got on a bus without checking where it was going and I couldn't get off. And it was just almost like speed. It was just gathering speed the entire time and became more frightening the further you went on that journey.
And you've spoken openly about anxiety, depression, and suicidal thinking. Thank you for trusting us with that. In a gentle, non-detailed way, what do you wish people understood about how someone can look high functioning and still be in real danger internally?
I think it's so difficult to tell because the signs are really subtle. The people in my world had no idea until it actually happened. The thing that I would say is that people withdraw, the behavior becomes slightly erratic. When someone dismisses and constantly says they're fine, that now screams alarm bells to me because I kept putting this huge brave face on it. And for me, that period of my life was in my 20s. I had very severe clinical depression. I attempted to take my life. And when I hit 47, the burnout, there was a similarity and it surfaced again. And I always say the reason I could dig out of burnout is because I trusted myself that I'd done it once before. Now, what I'd always wished was that I'd have had the courage to ask for help before I was in a position that I was. And that decision as well, I think it's that thing of, it's a really frightening thought. And so to anybody that's listening, I empathize. To verbalize that when you're thinking it is really frightening. There's a finality in saying those words because you kind of don't know where it goes from there. And I promise you, anyone that's listening, that will be the hardest thing you do is tell someone. From that point forward, it will be easier. I'm not going to say it's a completely easy road, but you'll no longer be doing it alone. Because I didn't share that thought process, it built up to a point that it became the only thing I thought about. It was like overwhelming in the end. And it felt like it was, I always say to people, I never wanted to die. I just didn't want to be in pain anymore. And I just didn't know how else to say that. And also, I'm a wee bit older. That's 30 something years ago now. And, back then, mental health, we've got a long way to go today, but we've come so far. Kind of the shame back then was unbelievable. You would just never have said it, or, you wouldn't have spoken freely about it. You didn't hear mental health discussed at all. As a kid, the local mental health hospital was referred to as the loony bin. And so for me at that point, I wasn't about to walk into any room and say, by the way, I feel like I want to kill myself. And we've moved beyond that. I'm not saying that that's made it any easier, but you've amazingly put the links in the thing today, and reach out is my biggest piece of advice. But those thoughts, I think, are not as uncommon with people as we think they are.
And I think because as we've grown up, that shame that's with those thoughts and feelings that come along, and also there is a level of embarrassment at times when you're having those thoughts and you don't know that anybody else is. It feels really isolating, and it can feel like you're the only person going through it because it's not discussed. It's not easily brought up either. And it's something that we've experienced with some of our loved ones as well. And it's picking up on those little tiny signs that aren't always obvious to everybody else. Snapping at something that they wouldn't normally snap at, withdrawing into their space and not really wanting to be social even within the family unit. And that statement, I'm fine, it's how it's delivered. I'm fine. And snapping and understanding that they're not fine. But the fear of telling me that they're not fine is part of the barrier. And as caregivers and supportive family members, I think it's really important to say and recognize that they're not doing okay, and be the groundings that they're unable to reach out for. And that just may be, hey, come have a cuppa with me. And nothing is said. They just need somebody's body there.
I think the other one is for those people on the outside to be brave enough to say it to that person. Look, I'll accept that you think you're fine, but I just want you to know that if ever you're not, and if ever it's a dark thought or you really aren't okay, I'm here just to listen, and I will not judge you for anything you say, because that opens the doorway for that person to feel comfortable, to start moving away from the shame and to start moving in a direction of, just said there, the loneliness that goes with it. And it's like a catch-22 because it makes you feel lonely. So you're desperately trying not to be lonely. So you're not going to do anything that you think might make you lonelier, like say, hey world, I don't feel okay, and actually I feel so bad I've been thinking suicidal thoughts, because we all think, well, straight away no one's going to talk to me or it's going to be awkward. And I don't think normalize is the right word, but there's a way where we kind of need to normalize that conversation, and we need to make it a safe and compassionate conversation for people to have, and to say, I'm really not coping.
And I think it's open for providing stability for them as well. Sometimes they do. They just need to hear that they're not alone, that there's somebody there. And that can make all of the difference in bridging that gap between where they are and where you are. And I think recognizing those small signs, as not that that's automatically means that someone is at that point, but that they're probably needing that space of no shame, no guilt. Doesn't matter what you say here, you're safe. I'll respect what you have to say. And then we'll come up with a plan together. We'll make a plan that makes them feel heard and seen and safe.
And I think you've just said it there. And if I go back without going too deep, but I always share really openly because I'm a long way away from that now, and I know I'm a long way away from it. And if I can share and make people feel or understand that it's not something to be shameful of, I'm not ashamed of it. I never ever hide away from the fact that that's part of who I was at some point. And for me, what you just said there, to feel seen, heard and listened to. At that point of time in my life, I really didn't feel that. And when I came round in the hospital, I instantly tried to leave. And this nurse stopped me. There was a discussion. I broke down. I was in the middle of the reception area of the emergency department on the floor, sobbing. And this nurse got down on the floor, put my head in her lap, and stroked my hair, told me that it would all be all right. I went back a couple of months later to say to her that in that moment you changed everything. I felt seen, heard and listened to. She didn't judge me. She didn't do any of those. And she showed me that compassion. I sometimes think if only I'd had that compassion before, then that would have been enough. So to lean into what we were saying before is that compassion, that kindness and that safe space makes all the difference.
And I think that honesty helps caregivers so much because many are quietly thinking, I'm not okay, but I can't say that out loud. Or I'm noticing this in the loved one I care for. How do I approach it in a compassionate, caring way that doesn't make them feel like they're about to be sent away somewhere, or there's this stigma about being sent to the hospital with mental health challenges or mental health concerns. And I think that's also part of the barrier, is feeling like, and hearing stories of being put away for periods of time and not having the right care and feeling more isolated. And I think if we as caregivers can recognize if we're not okay in ourselves and that we are part of the care plan, and if we don't take care of us in that space, it doesn't mean that anything will change, except that maybe we get to talk to someone before we get to that point. And then for our loved ones who are going through this process of anxiety, depression, and deep sadness because they're stuck in a cycle that they never really signed up for, I think it's also really important that they can see that first steps are not just automatic hospitalization, that there are steps in between that they can access, especially with the care and crisis support that is available through the phone or on the internet, to provide them with like a stepping stone to get them to help outside of the hospital system. And I want to bring this directly to the caregiver experience, because carers are not only tired, they're carrying constant vigilance around what they're doing. When you work with people in overwhelm, what do you see happening in their nervous system? How does burnout show up in a body?
So it's such a silent thing. It grows gradually because we can bat it away and assign it to so many other things. Usually we just say, I'm tired, I've done a 12-hour shift, I've done this kind of thing. And so essentially, initially, it starts to feel just like physical tiredness. You know, there's this kind of sense of the motivation goes, it's harder to push through. What's happening at the same time, burnout itself is a combination of both physical and emotional tiredness. And it's when the two meet together at their absolute max that we are fried. There's no other way to put it. And it's normalized an awful lot in lots of things because we all have jobs. We all have a job where we have a hectic shift and we have to push through, and we get home and we're absolutely exhausted. And then that's fine. We all have to do that sometimes. But when you're doing that every day, and when you're getting up and that becomes a constant, and then you add into that the overwhelm, which then causes the emotional, which is your thoughts on loop. And going back to that thing we were saying there, is pushing things to one side. I haven't got time. I'm just tired. I haven't got time to think about it. The overwhelm is the brain not getting to deal with its to-do list. And then, I quite often say to people, you need to imagine that inside here is like a desk. There's an in tray and an out tray. And the idea is to have the in tray empty. And when we've got overwhelm, it's because our in tray is full. So there's all of these things. So you can totally start putting those things to one side, because by nature, your job is to put someone first, but it's to put someone first for a set amount of time, not for 24 hours. But then when we get home, we're tired because it was physically hard. So that in tray has all of today's stuff in it. And gradually over time, all of that builds up until you really are now hitting that point of overwhelm that is emotional exhaustion. Then tie in the physical, and that is the magic recipe for burnout. And it's so slow and gradual that when I work with people now, I obviously have become master of spotting the signs very early, and I work with clients and I'm like, that has to stop. And they're like, why? And I'm like, because that's a one-way street right now. And we'll go on and talk about why it's important, I'm sure, later in the conversation, and how I gear people to deal with that process. Don't be frightened to acknowledge that this isn't just tiredness, because the sooner you acknowledge that, the much easier it is to come back from. You know, for me, when I left my corporate job, I didn't spot the signs, and I ended up sitting in a toilet cubicle crying, funnily enough staring at a poster on the back of the door that said, talk to a mental health first aider. And I was like, I kind of feel like it's too late for that now. And I went home and ended up being off for 3 weeks that day. And it wasn't even a bad day. I mean, I think that's the thing as well that was kind of quite ironic in it, is I'd had much tougher days, but the day that broke me was really insignificant. It just was, my brain just literally went, I can't do no more. No, I can't listen in that meeting. I can't make a note. I can't write on a flip chart. I just need to leave the building.
And for me, I've also been through burnout, and it started manifesting physically, and I didn't know what it was. It had not been talked about. It wasn't something that was acknowledged either. When, you went and sought help, it was, this is just female anxiety. And I started this journey of J&B Inspired and Radiant Moments because so often the dismissal of caregiver burnout is, it's just your age, it's just anxiety, it's female anxiety, it's just part of your monthly process. And it wasn't that. It was my body hitting a brick wall and going, you have to stop. There is no option but stopping. And when you look at compassion fatigue in simple terms, what is it and what isn't it? So caregivers can recognize it without shaming themselves, because I think that is something that's not talked about openly in spaces, is that being compassionate and being always on has an impact overall and long term. And this is for like the long haul caregiver who didn't realize that we were stepping into that role. And this is like a lifelong journey of support. It's not a sprint. It's a marathon that we need to show ourselves grace, compassion, be okay with having some self-care and things in putting us as part of the care plan. So what does that look like?
I would say that it's like burnout with a side of guilt. And I've been in similar situations, and what starts to rear its head is resentment as an emotion. And then there's guilt attached to that. There's guilt for feeling that you're not meeting your needs, because quite often as caregivers or in that situation, we are looking after people who have complex illnesses, and there's that element of, well, who am I to complain? Like, I don't have a right to complain. But I would say that compassion fatigue is probably another symptom or the first symptom of burnout. So if you're certainly feeling that, then I would say to you, don't feel the guilt that goes with it, but accept that what's going on here is that you've reached that element of burnout. And I think that female anxiety, that was a new one for me when you said it. I mean, it does make me laugh when the medical profession comes up with things that they can just bat it away. I think the other thing that's kind of valid in that, your listeners to almost understand that they are allowed to have burnout. It's not the privilege of people in city jobs in doing all of those things. They're not the only people that burn out. Burnout doesn't just happen in the workplace. And so therefore, burnout is permitted. And I think if you can maybe frame it as accepting that what you're experiencing is burnout, it cuts a little deeper because of the circumstances of your burnout. And maybe the easiest way to come back from it is to move away from feeling like you've stopped being compassionate and understand that you are just burnt out and something needs to change.
Our role is 24 hours, 7 days a week. And when you think about the compounding nature of having the mental load on top of running a household, so remembering appointments, medications, I would walk in and I would be able to open my filing cabinet and I would know every dosage, everything that was given. And then the support is not there for caregivers in medical systems. And so right there is the heart of Caregiver Oasis, because our needs and the needs of other caregivers needs to be a part of the care plan in order to help us to not reach burnout, for us to be acknowledged and seen as, well, if this person falls down, that impacts the medical system, that impacts the home system, because the things that we do as caregivers and the process that we follow every single day becomes second nature. We don't even think about it. And then when somebody has to step into our shoes, suddenly, unexpectedly, they're like, ooh, where do I find that information? And even when you're in burnout, that person needs you to write a list of everything that you do in the day, especially if your kids have got allergies, or they're peg fed, or they've got a trach. It's not just as simple as turning to the person beside you. We need somebody who's got medical experience. This is a 24-hour position and those types of things. And I think when we consider that load, burnout prevention, burnout support should be part of that journey from day one, so that the caregiver doesn't ever reach burnout. And there are options for them to have support along the way. And that's why I was so excited about today's conversation. And I love your framing. On an airplane, oxygen mask first, not because you matter more, but because you can't help anyone if you collapse and you've stopped breathing. Can you tell me, what is oxygen and why did you create it?
So oxygen actually was created in a workplace that been working with, where they provide services to people struggling with mental health, homelessness, and a lot of addictive behavior. So, I mean, they're in jobs, but compassion fatigue, huge in that area, and these are very vulnerable adults with very complex needs and quite a lot of challenging behavior at times. And there's a lot of people there where the organization, it's a voluntary organization, and I went in to improve their workplace wellbeing because their sickness rate was so high and staff were just like, I can't do this anymore. People would dropping like flies. And one of the points is that, nobody had a method of coping with stress, and they had no way of signaling it to others. And I used the oxygen mask with lots of clients. That was embedded in my work already. I always say to clients, got to put the oxygen mask on yourself first before you can save anyone else. That plane's going down. Okay, you are no use if you don't do that. They tell you that at the front of the plane. So I'd actually introduced a session based on that, and they kind of all went with it. And we discussed what happens, and I kind of want to dig into that a little bit, is that you said there, like all of those physical symptoms you have, but that's completely natural, because when you're in that position, your body is flooded with cortisol, and cortisol will eventually trigger autoimmune reactions. That's where the physical pain comes from, is your body is in like stress mode, and it's in stress mode because 90% of our decision making is done in our subconscious. What's really frightening about that is in times of stress, it will start making decisions 10 seconds before you're even aware. There's moments where you go, well, I just lost it and I don't know why. It's that 10-second thing, because your subconscious doesn't know whether it's Tuesday or a saber-toothed tiger. It literally doesn't have the power to work that out. And so if it's sensed it and it's triggered it, and if you're a caregiver and you're in a high stress thing, we came up with oxygen as an acronym, which I'll go through with everybody now, but also as a word, like a safe word. So the team actually use it now to exit a situation. So they will just look at a colleague and say oxygen and walk off. And it's become acceptable because, in fact, I was there today in one of the outreach centers, and 2 clients started getting aggressive, and we kind of had to lean in and to stop this, what could possibly have turned into a physical violence. And after we'd done that, this member of the team just looked at me and went oxygen and walked outside. And it kind of was just a very special moment for me, because it's the first time I'd actually witnessed it in that team in action. Everything I do as a coach, I'm obsessed with neuroscience. And one of my fellow coaches says that I am crystals and yoga meets science, because I am a very spiritual person and I love all of that, but I also love knowing the why. Like, what is it that actually magically does? Why does it work? I believe it works, but what is the benefit? And I've found as a coach that when people can actually assign a proper physical reaction in their body to it and a reason, there's better follow through on it. So the reason oxygen exists is it's the 10-second rule. So when we spoke about it, that allowing yourself time to engage your conscious with your subconscious and work out that it is Tuesday and it's not a saber-toothed tiger. It's for those straw that breaks the camel's back moments where you can feel it kind of thing. And so first letter is obviously O, and that is simply to observe, to pause, to stop, and to observe what's going on, to sense what's going on in your body, to sense what's going on around you and check in with it. Almost to not deny the feeling that's come up, but to question it a little, to engage your conscious in it. So that moment of pause starts to lower that chemistry because you interrupt the process. Because if you don't, then adrenaline hits in. So if it senses it and it thinks it's bad and you go with it, which is that point of if that emotion comes up or that sense of stress or I can't cope or it's a saber-toothed tiger when it's not, then it will put you in full fight or flight mode. And so the whole point of the observe is, okay, let's just take a moment and see what's really going on. Because I'm sure we've all been in those situations where we've had to apologize because we misunderstood, because we raced off. We went at the first thought. So the O is for observe. I encourage people to literally say the word to themselves in that moment out loud, or have it with the person you look after and say, you know what, sometimes when it is too much, but I'm just going to say oxygen. Because that's comfortable then. There's that point where, because it's awful, it's awkward. Like, it's a safe word where you just agree, oxygen.
It's an emotional boundary.
Yeah.
That's what you're putting in place, an emotional boundary to give yourself an out before you go boom.
And for both of you, but in a comfortable way that isn't then assigning guilt, because there's an element if you turn around and you say, I've really got to step out the room. And it's hard, like I even did it there with my voice, because it's hard not to say that without following through and putting an emotion on it and saying enough's enough. Whereas oxygen, we're done. When you say it, one of my clients actually said, I actually visualize myself putting the mask over my face. If you can visualize with it, even better. The X is for exhale. And with this, that is a long exhale. And then people go, that's what, no inhale. And I'm like, no, because in that moment, I promise you, you will already have enough breath to exhale. Empty everything out. Let your shoulders drop. Do the whole lot, because that in itself is a physical signal to your body to let go of tension. And then the next one, the Y, is for yield, which is lean into it. No guilt. No, nothing. Like, yield to that moment, accept it. Do not feel guilty. It is a completely natural thing to experience moments of stress and have to calm yourself down. You have not failed. Lean into it, because when you lean into it, there is a huge power to learn and develop and to get better and to really understand your emotions and to understand how to manage that better next time, to learn what works. And you're taking a shoulda off the list straight away, because when we don't do these things, these are the things that we're putting in a I shoulda in tray upstairs and feeding the overwhelm, or I could have handled that better, or I would have done that if I'd known. So yield, lean into it and understand what it really was, accept it and learn and grow from it. And then ground. And in that one, that is, I always say to people, feet firmly on the ground. If you can, take your shoes off and do it outside. So I've been seen doing this. It's one of the ways that I prepare to go on stage if I'm presenting to a big audience. And everyone's like, where is he? And if my friend's there, he's outside with his feet in the grass. If you can literally, even not barefoot, but if you can go and put your feet on the ground, there is again a chemical reaction that happens in your body in that connection, because you feel reconnected and you feel strength and you feel a calmness. Also, whilst you're doing all of these things, you are diverting yourself away from the saber-toothed tiger. So all of this process is actually taking you in a direction where you're not going near it. And so, like, that's why it works, because by the time you've got to the end, it's over. Like, it's over and you're back in control. And the next one is to engage. So when you put your feet on the ground is then to engage, and then that's where you want to bring your breath back in. And I say to people, my favorite breathing technique is 4-4-4. So in for 4, hold for 4, out for 4. If you do that 3 times, I promise you'll be in an entirely different place, because what you're doing then, strangely, as it's called, oxygen, is you are flooding your body with oxygen, and that will naturally start to calm the nervous system. So the final one after that is to nurture, and nurture is to be kind to yourself, to learn from the message, to not beat yourself up, to accept it and learn and to grow from it, and to show yourself compassion and to not feel guilt in that nurturing. So in that moment of nurturing after the breath is also to congratulate yourself. That's the point of getting to N, because that's when you get to say, I did it. And by that time, whatever it was that triggered it is well out the way. And so they have all absolutely loved it, from 2 aspects: from a personal level, to just say oxygen to themselves and then to think through that process. Also as a safe word in the team to say, because I'm a huge one for language, and the words that we use tell our brains so many things. So in that situation, saying I'm stressed is an instruction to your body to be stressed. Your subconscious hears you say I'm stressed. It starts going, well, we're stressed. Let's do stressed things. We've heard it. That's true. It's confirmed. We're all stressed. So when you say oxygen, you're kind of accepting it, but you're not confirming it. It's like, I'm not going to confirm or deny that at this moment, because I believe there's room to grow and move beyond it. And I think afterwards, take time to reflect on it. And that whole process probably takes you no more than 2 minutes maximum. And that's 2 minutes that is an antidote to burnout, because it is those chemicals that are triggered in that stress response over time that build up that cortisol, that keep on pushing through, that keep doing it, that eventually brings you to that compassion fatigue and that burnout. And if you can just think about the oxygen mask in those moments, just think about it, because that's the reality. What you said there is here in the UK, there and across the world, the work that carers do is phenomenal and so much. And I don't know what would happen if we couldn't do it. And that's also why when I reached out about the show, I was like, this is a really important place to say this, because it's more vital than anything. It's more real than anything. If your audience don't put that oxygen mask on themselves first, then it is a real mess. And so this isn't selfish. This is essential. It's a way of showing compassion to the person that you care for, because compassion to yourself is compassion to them.
And I think also I love that last letter, because I think caregivers nurture everyone else. And so it's a reminder that we deserve to be nurtured too. And the whole process allows us to take that big breath, to be able to be present, to be able to be kind to ourselves in those moments. And I think it's a great space to have that safe word or that emotional boundary in place that can be applied in both directions. And I wanted to ask, because here on Radiant Moments, Caregiver Oasis, we really like micro moments, tiny moments where caregivers can really apply these strategies to prevent burnout, to come back from burnout, to set up these strategies. What does oxygen look like in tiny moments, the ones caregivers actually have? For example, in the car after an appointment where they've had to be on advocate mode, they're having to have challenging conversations with multiple people, with multiple different personalities, or in the kitchen when everybody needs something and you're in the middle of preparing medication that you need like laser force focus for, or in a waiting room where you're have some anxiety because you didn't have a great conversation with this medical professional last time and you're not sure what's coming for you. And when you're about to send a text or an email and you might be in that space where you're feeling a little bit resentful or shameful or guilt and it's not sent exactly the way you wanted and you may regret it afterwards.
That last one I think is a prime opportunity for oxygen, is because that's the observe. That's exactly where it's for. It's for in every single one of those moments. Is that is, like I say, there's so many ways you can use it as a safe word, but you can just use it yourself. And as you feel that, just stand there and go, oxygen, and just give yourself that time to process. Don't send the text until you make sure your oxygen level is right up. When you come out of that appointment, don't come out of the appointment and get in the car and carry straight on. Do 3 minutes of oxygen. Like you put your person that you care for, get them sorted, get them in the car, get them safe. But then there's a part where you need to get yourself safe before you drive. So take a moment of oxygen stood by the car, or even as you close the boot of the car, just take a couple of extra seconds to take some oxygen. And there are obviously times within care environment where you can't go at that moment, but the moment you can go, you need to go and just do that. And that 3 minutes, I can't emphasize what the return on it is, kind of thing, over time. Like the return on it over time is your health, but also the health and the well-being of the people that you care for, because it's that oxygen mask. What would happen if you weren't there? So to be really outrageous here, I'm going to say that it's selfish to not take oxygen. It's actually selfish to not do it because you jeopardize two people's well-being. And if that helps reframe it as not being selfish, that's how I would reframe it. Is this is not selfish. This is essential for both of us, for me and for you.
And I really appreciate you putting it in those words that this is not a selfish act. This is a selfless act to be able to show up for yourself so you can show up for somebody else. And a lot of times I hear, I don't have time for self-care. How do we reframe oxygen as a 60 to 90 second nervous system boundary that is not something that they add on, that they can habit stack so that they can access it and not feel guilty of taking that small amount of time?
I think, like you said it there, is to not see it as a habit, but to almost try and see it as a part of the job that you do, a part of being a carer. In as much as you would never not fill out a chart, never not change dressings, never not do any of the roles that come with your caring role, this is essentially a part of your role. If you think about the emergency services, and I was thinking about this today because I knew I was coming on the podcast, and I was like, how can I frame it? And there is that thing that the best I could think of, and if it's not very good, I apologize, but that it was a similarity to that whole kind of fact that firefighters are trained not to run into a burning building. Even when they know there's people in there, there is a process to doing that. So I get it's counterintuitive because as a human being, you stand there and there's a child in a window and the building's on fire and you're a firefighter. And I have a couple of friends who are firefighters. They say it's kind of one of the hardest parts of their training is being taught to not rush in, being taught to stand back, to do all of those things. And I think that you said it really nicely there, is this isn't a habit and it isn't actually a self-care routine. I get where you're coming from. I mean, I'm not a fan of it when people say what you need is a nice hot bath and some candles. And I'm like, that's really not going to fix it. and like ridiculous suggestions like, why don't you go away for the weekend? Yeah, like these kind of things. And I think that maybe part of it is reframing what self-care means. Because when we hear the word self-care, that's what we automatically think. A spa day, a holiday, an evening out, a bath with candles. And because we frame it back to the subconscious, it hears the word and it's almost automatically going, well, it's time for self-care. We've told you this before. Whereas kind of the fact is to actually start reframing what self-care is for you and understand that it is about that nurture and that self-compassion. And it's essentially really about taking time for you. And it doesn't have to be a candle bath. It doesn't have to be any of those things, but it's time where you step away. I would never want anybody listening to have that sense of feeling that this was another thing to add to their list. And I talk about compassion a lot with clients. And when I talk about compassion, I often get asked, like, what was the hardest thing in my journey? And the hardest thing in my journey was self-compassion. And because we think about compassion, and if you're a carer, I think you're automatically wired to think that compassion is something that happens to other people, not to you. If your compassion tank isn't full, you can't possibly be compassionate. And oxytocin and serotonin are the best antidotes to things like cortisol, and they are from compassion. So they are from that human contact, from that, but we can do it to ourselves as well. So this is, okay, I'm not a fan of hacks, but I'm going to give you one. One of the things that you can do is, I am a huge fan of gratitudes. And when you thank yourself in a written gratitude, the evidence now shows that you actually do produce oxytocin and serotonin. So again, with that oxygen, the reason that there's actually a physical reason for it is when you get to that nurture bit, you are actually filling your tank. You're filling your tank to empower you to go back into that room and to do those things. And so if you're going on a journey, you don't attempt to get in the car. If you're going to a hospital appointment, you wouldn't get in the car without enough petrol. And if you're not going to leave without the medication for the person you care for. So can't really show up without compassion in your tank. So it's an essential, not an add-on. And it's part of what you do. Because when you show up with compassion as well, I think in many things, when you are in those situations and you come with compassion, you approach the situation differently and it is more joyful and it is less stressful. I'm not in the position of caring for anybody full time, but obviously in the voluntary work I do, there are moments there where I've sat with people really heavily in the throes of addiction who are sleeping on the streets, who have nothing, and that moment of kindness. And there was one the other day that threw their arms around me and said, "Thank you so much." And I said, "Oh no, thank you." And they said, "Well, what are you thanking me for?" And I was like, "Well, you thanked me, so I'm thanking you because this is a two-way thing." I just got a lot of oxytocin and a sense of I'm okay. And in showing you compassion, you showed me compassion, and my tank is now refilled. And
Love that it's not be calmer. It's here's a structure to come back to yourself. And I really appreciate when you were talking about gratitude before, because I think it is such an important element of recovering from burnout, preventing burnout, and being kind to yourself. And so I provide a free resource like we were talking about gratitude that anybody can access so that they can start that journey. One thing I appreciate in your notes is your willingness to talk about shame, because caregivers live with that a lot of the time. And you develop the 9 principles of authentic living. Caregivers, those can feel like a luxury, but they're actually stabilizing. Which principles matter most when someone is overwhelmed and losing themselves?
awareness is the first one, which is the observer game, which is being aware, pausing and going, okay, and not trying to deny that you feel it. Because if you feel it, you feel it. So pretending you don't is useless. And pretending you don't is again putting something in the in tray. And the next day you'll put it back in the in tray and back in the in tray. And so you start to feed the overwhelm. So the easiest trick is to actually be aware. And a huge part of awareness, I encourage everybody to write a journal. And this doesn't have to be lengths and lengths of pages. In fact, I had a client once who said they really couldn't do it. So I said, okay, but then just write down, I can't do this 3 times and close the book. And they did that. The first night, And then the second, and I said, I don't care how many times you did it. And I think it was about 3 nights in they did it. And by the 4th night, they actually wrote their journal. Like, it was that whole thing. And it's not really about what you write. It's actually just the process of writing. I would be so bold as to say that kind of just do some really rubbish writing. It's not for anybody else, for you. But the evidence is now coming in that journaling for 10 to 15 minutes 3 times a week will reduce anxiety by 45%. And it's about writing it, because what starts to happen is you start to empty your in tray. What you do is you calm your subconscious. Awareness is important. So to really be aware, because in that process, you start to understand what's really going on, rather than just pushing through because you're tired, or denying it because it was a bad day, or you have to drive around the block 3 times to park, or all the lovely little reasons that we give it that aren't the real reasons, that just put it to one side. And I think compassion, for sure, obviously, I mean, kind of leading on from where we were before, is compassion's essential. And I would say awareness, understanding, and compassion. And in understanding, that is about values and about understanding what your values are. I work with so many clients, and they say that this is always the values work that we do is the greatest thing that set them free, because it was from those values then that they're able to form boundaries, and boundaries without guilt, what your values are, what's negotiable and non-negotiable, and what you need as a human being. And so being really clear on what your values are and what boundaries exist around that. Because boundaries as well, we see them as such, like, I say to people, stop seeing it as like a brick wall, okay? It's a fence with a gate. Now, some boundaries don't have a gate. Some boundaries are non-negotiable. And some boundaries are here, and some boundaries are out here, like they're further away from us. And some have a gate, and sometimes we let people through that boundary, but on very strict terms, and other times we don't. But it's very hard to set boundaries if you don't know what your values are, because essentially that's where your boundaries come from. So awareness, understanding, and compassion, for sure.
I think that's really important for caregivers and everyday citizens should really understand, is that if you don't know what your values are, there's no way to start that, setting those boundaries in place. And I think finding out what your values are, because values change over time, especially when you're in different circumstances after you've experienced life. I think there needs to be an understanding that that's a fluid, come and go flow. It's not like this is my value and I have this value for my whole life, because it does change, and it can change, and it has to have that flexibility and fluidity. And I think that's the same with boundaries as well, is that our boundaries can change, our boundaries can become stricter, our boundaries can become, like you said, an open gate or a closed gate with really strict conditions, so that we respect ourselves in that process. And we were talking earlier about shame, and you said shame keeps people silent, and silent fuels suicidal thinking. What would you want a caregiver to hear if they've been scared to say, I'm not coping, I've gone from green to orange and now I'm in the red zone? And do you assist the caregiver to not be scared to say, I'm not coping right now, we need to change the plan and I have to be a part of it?
I think, those situations are so complex, but is to understand that there is nothing to be shameful of. There is nothing to say I'm not okay, to say I'm not coping, to say this has to change. I think that's actually a quality of a really good caregiver. And I think we see it as the opposite. But the supremo caregiver is the caregiver that knows when enough's enough, because that's actually how you take ultimate care of the people you look after. It's back to the oxygen mask again, because otherwise you are essentially, if you're unwell or it goes beyond a point or your health suffers, I kind of have loads of things racing through my head about situations that could happen. In hospitals, there's a reason why nurses are only allowed to work a certain amount of hours, and doctors and firefighters and pilots and people that drive trains and all of those things where people are responsible for lives. There is a limit to how long they are allowed to continuously do it. And so you have the right, without shame, to say that is enough and I need to change this, not for me, but for the people I care for. Because if this continues, I won't be able to care.
And I think that's such a life-saving reframe. Honesty is not burdening others, it's prevention of something terrible happening, potentially missing something so that the person that you love and care for is in danger. Because you're right, as a caregiver, there isn't an interchangeable person most of the time. There isn't somebody who goes, you've worked 12 hours, it's time to clock off. It's a constant on, constantly keep going type of situation that I think a lot of medical industries are not taking into account when they're making these plans and telling you how to manage these things. They're forgetting that they get to clock off, that as a caregiver, we didn't do 12 years of medical education. How are we supposed to know what they know if they're not sharing it? How are we supposed to know that's even acceptable to be considered for that? And unless you get a medical professional who is worldly, has lived the experience of being a caregiver themselves, it's not something that is widely shared. And there's lots of instances across the 14 years that I've been doing this, or almost 15 years now, that I have really? You couldn't have shared that piece of information. I just happened to walk past another parent and be like, oh my goodness, what is that? And I need that in my life. And they're like, has nobody told you about that? I'm like, no, is that a thing? Is it? You don't know what you don't know. And I think I want to land this in one small step that caregivers can take this week. If a caregiver tries oxygen one time this week, when should they use it first? What moment will give them the biggest relief?
I would say practice it first. Okay. So have a little dry run with a cup of tea. Do that whole thing. I know you're going to give it. The download is available on my website, so they haven't got to remember it all today. And I've given that through to you as well. And that's obviously completely free. And please download it, email me as well and tell me how you got on with it. I think the first thing is it's simple. You can remember the word oxygen. I always say, keep it simple with everything for that whole thing, and so I would say with a cup of tea, just something you normally do that you can sit there and go through that process while you do it. And when you're comfortable with it, then that's when you need to introduce it to the people that you care for. Obviously I did it in a team and we all worked through it together. But I think if you're going to introduce it as your safe word, which I wholeheartedly encourage, because again, there's compassion in that almost. We're diffusing a situation before it happens. So we're kind of stepping away with love almost and just going oxygen. And so I think work through it, practice those steps. And look, when you get to N, remember, it's not about perfection. And oxygen is whatever it is for you. But if you feel uncomfortable, maybe latch onto the science bit that I gave you to understand that there is a physical thing happening. This isn't crystals and yoga and woo-woo. This is a physical thing that is happening, that is calming your nervous system and taking you away from that burnout point and allowing you that time. Just practice it once. And I love what you say there. I'm a huge fan of James Clear, Atomic Habits, and he talks about compound interest of habit. And if we're just 1% better every day. So I love what you said there is if you just do oxygen once this week and twice the next week, and I'm going to set this as a challenge to your listeners. I'd love it if somebody emailed me in a few months' time and said, I do oxygen every day. Because if you wanted to have an aim, is to just have a moment of oxygen every day for yourself.
I think that's beautiful. And when I created this series of Radiant Moments, I wanted to provide every caregiver with small micro moments that they could pull on and practice before they became a crisis in their day. And that can happen without notice and suddenly, so that they can access it even in those really difficult moments. And I always like to ask, what's one sentence you'd want carers to remember when guilt shows up after they protect their own well-being?
That there is essentially no need for guilt because when you take care of yourself, you are refueling your compassion tank, and compassion is at the core of what you do as a carer. And so you can't be guilty about what you do, because it's a very beautiful thing. To look after and care for another human being is a very beautiful thing. And when you take a moment from your fuel, it is like filling a car with fuel. You are filling your compassion tank, and you are resetting your system, and you are calming your nervous system so that you can turn up as your best compassionately for the people that you care for without sacrificing yourself.
Love how you're acknowledging what they do day to day in their compassion, and that shows them that there's no guilt aligned with their own well-being, because in order to give compassion, you have to be well. You have to be able to be in it to provide it. For the caregiver who is listening on the edge of emotionally and mentally fatigued, what's your gentle encouragement for them reaching out for support so they don't feel shame, concern, or worry?
I think the first thing to do is to acknowledge that it won't get better by itself. So if that's how you feel, then it's not going to get better by itself. A good night's sleep, a meal, a day off, they're not going to fix it. Okay. Like, that's kind of going back to our whole conversation, is oxygen, all those things. But that's the whole point of not getting to that point. As you've said, you've experienced it, I've experienced it. When you get to that point, the kind of decision gets taken out of your hand a little bit, because your body shuts down. And so if you're feeling like that, the sooner you act, the better. And depending on your circumstances, but if it's not a family member, then go to your GP, go to your doctor and say that this is it. And if they try and tell you you've got female anxiety or bat it away, smack your fist on the desk and say that is not what it is. And if they still refuse, get a second opinion, because you have the right to be emotionally safe, secure, and physically well. And being a carer doesn't mean that you sacrificed your own well-being just in the service of others. And so it's so hard to say, like, I don't know how you can take someone away from that shame. I would like to believe that we live in a world now where they wouldn't be made to feel ashamed. However, there is no shame in saying I can't cope. And I suppose I go back to, when we talked about earlier on about suicidal thoughts, it will probably be the bravest thing you do. So to align it to that, I know it's very different, but the bravest thing you do will be ask for help. I promise you that from that point forward, it will get easier. I can't promise you that help will suddenly arrive, but when you've said it once, it will get easier to say it a second time. It's the fear of that first bit. But when you say it the once, if the doctor doesn't listen, if it isn't those things, you will have rehearsed, and so you will be in a better position. So I just urge everybody to reach out. I know that you have loads of support lines in your show notes as well, is to reach out and have that conversation and say this is it. And if you're not really sure where to go, then seek advice from the advice lines that you're putting up, or from a family member, or for your doctor. But don't think you can push through it, because I promise you, you cannot.
And if anything in today's conversation brings up suicidal thoughts, or you don't feel safe, please reach out immediately for support. We've listed the crisis support links in the show notes, as Jody has just described. And I'd love to ask, before we close out our conversation today, where can listeners find you and learn more about your work, Jody?
The easiest thing is to just go to my website. Everything's there. My community, which is free to join, where the tool is you're going to post, all my social links, and it's authenticcoaching.me. It's as simple as that, authenticcoaching.me.
I love that. That's a very good website name, I feel. Thank you so much for providing that free resource as well, and it will definitely be in the show notes below. Jody, thank you for this conversation, for your honesty, and for offering something that actually fits real caregiving life. Today, we've talked about how burnout and compassion fatigue live in the nervous system, not just in your mindset. Why caregivers struggle with guilt when they try to protect themselves, how micro boundaries can be both compassionate and firm, and how oxygen gives carers a practical way to say, I matter too, in the moments they usually abandon themselves. If you're listening and you're right in the thick of it, I want you to hear this. You don't have to wait until you collapse to deserve support. One small boundary, one small pause, and one moment of oxygen. To everyone listening, thank you for spending this time with us. You don't have to hold it all alone. I'm Michelle, and this is Radiant Moments. Until next time, take gentle care of your radiant moments and of yourself.